Hello, my darling. I hope you're well, and welcome to another episode of the Mpoma Ponya podcast. This is a space where we talk about self-love, soft power, healing, and the real and sometimes uncomfortable process of becoming the woman or man you know you're meant to be, right? It is my hope and desire that at the end of this episode, you will feel empowered, enriched, and ready to show up as the best version of yourself. So today's conversation is one that is very close to my heart, as with all conversations that we have on here, but it's around really exploring self-love beyond aesthetics. I think to a large extent, the concept of self-love has been highly commercialized, right? Sometimes we oversimplify it, and oftentimes I do find that we misunderstand it. So today we're talking about loving yourself beyond the look, beyond the aesthetics. Knowing and loving the real you, not just the version that looks good on social media or the one that fits nicely and neatly into wellness trends and morning routines and all the things that we love, but really going beyond that, the real lived and sometimes messy practice of loving yourself when no one is watching. If you've, ever thought to yourself, I do all the self-care things, but I still feel disconnected, or I look fine on the outside, I'm cute, but I'm not quite comfortable in, my own skin, then this episode is for you. I don't exactly know when, but somewhere along the line, we really became very externally focused when we look at the concept of self-love. It became more about how things looked rather than how they felt. And listen, I love a bubble bath, okay? I love my candles. I love my scents. I love my fragrance. I love a perfectly curated morning routine. I'll take that any day. And while that's absolutely perfect and there's nothing wrong with that, and enjoying those things, it's important to know and acknowledge that they're not the foundation of self-love. I would think of them as the icing on the cake. And what we want to do is bake the actual cake. I want you to experience the whole entire thing. It's such a beautiful and wholesome experience to finally feel at home within yourself. I really want you to spend time understanding and unpacking these ingredients of the self-love cake, mixing them up very gently, skipping no steps as you would when you bake a cake, not rushing the baking process and letting it cool down and settle, and then absolutely bring out the icing, bring out the sprinkles and the decor. And what you don't want to do is live your life for the icing, for the toppings, because it'll take one shake to make it all crumble down, right? But when you have that strong foundation and you've really invested in building it, suddenly, even when storms come to shake you up, you still stand. Even when the sprinkles sometimes are not so shiny, you still have that knowing that, listen, I love self, I appreciate self, and the sun will shine again, but mina, guamina, I'm content, right? So real self-love really begins much deeper, than the external. And often it doesn't feel Instagram friendly at all. It's not always the right shade or the right lighting. In fact, real self-love can sometimes feel inconvenient. It can sometimes feel uncomfortable or boring or lonely. It often involves choosing yourself at the risk of certain things, like being disliked, things like being judged or losing friendships that you've held on to for so long, but that they have not really been serving your inner being and your higher self. Loving yourself does not require you to betray yourself in order to keep others uncomfortable, right? So that's not a smooth ride. But when you know and you accept the fact that self-love goes beyond the glamour, then you hold space for yourself when you go through these transitions or when you experience the uncomfortable side of self-love. And choosing rest as an example, when society praises, exhaustion and being booked and busy. It's choosing honesty when silence would be it'd be the easy way out. It's choosing to advocate for yourself, right? And so my point here is that self-love is also not always about feeling good. It's allowing space to not be okay and creating space for that part of you, and not forcing it down or suppressing it. I do feel like sometimes self-love looks like canceling plans when your body is tired. Even when that guilt comes, and that's the discomfort I talk about, to say, listen, I made this commitment, but I'm really tired and I'm feeling down and my energy is all over the show. Friend, I actually can't make it. And being comfortable enough to say, I'm going to choose me in this time. And sometimes it looks like having, the difficult conversation instead of avoiding it. Whether be it the difficult conversation with yourself, because I do feel like sometimes we don't spend time with ourselves because it's uncomfortable. Some of us are scared of our own thoughts, right? And that's the discomfort I talk about. So you need to create that space where you can sit with yourself 15 minutes before everyone else wakes up, 15 minutes before the world starts demanding your time, to just sit and check in with yourself and be like, self, how are you feeling? What do you need right now? Sitting with yourself in that silence, even when you don't have the answers to these questions, instead of numbing, that hole with distraction or scrolling or watching, consuming, all the things. So my point is, while we love aesthetics, they tend to give you a momentary high, but true embodied self-love gives you that inner peace. It gives you that comfort in self to say, listen, even when things are not looking fantastic, the peace inside is just so amazing. And one thing I always say is the external is always a reflection of the internal. So if externally, you're not comfortable with how things are looking, it would behoove you to take a moment and go inside. There is no glow that surpasses the one that comes from inner peace and contentment. Another thing, I get it, when you love someone, you want to feel that you can trust them. Yes, so even for self-love, it's asking yourself, do you trust you? And if you don't, perhaps you spend some time building that self-trust, right? Do you trust yourself to walk away from things that don't feel right? When your intuition speaks to you, even though it speaks quietly, do you listen? I think many of us say we love ourselves, but we don't really trust ourselves. And if you think about it, we tend to override our intuition and our bodies. The body is always talking. So it's around creating the space to listen to what your body is saying. We dismiss our emotion. That's another thing that we don't listen to, that creates that feeling of not trusting self. We stay longer in situations than we should. We betray our own boundaries, and over time, that erodes our sense of self-love far more than skipping a skincare routine. Do you know what I mean? So self-love is not really built on big acts, once in a while, once a quarter, but it's built in those small daily choices that you make that tell your nervous system and your brain that, listen, I've got you. You okay? You must also remember that so many of us were conditioned, whether by family or society, or environment, we were conditioned to abandon ourselves when emotions get heavy. So would rather suppress it. When sadness shows up, would rather distract. Grab a drink, grab a snack, watch a series, do something other than sit with the feeling of being sad. When grief surfaces, we rush ourselves to be strong. So self-love says, stay with those emotions. Whether they fit what society expects from you in that time or not, stay and be present with yourself through that emotional wave. It's saying, I'm not sure how I'm going to fix this situation that I'm going through, but one thing for sure is that I will not let myself go. I will be there for me. Do you know? So that kind of love changes everything. It really teaches your body safety. It teaches your nervous system that we are home, we are okay, you can relax. And one thing about feeling safe is that when you feel safe, you begin to heal. You create room for healing to happen. I think one thing we do around healing, we want to make it activity based. Ne? We want to do many different types of techniques. And I mean, I've done that quite a lot, but I think true healing for me and experiencing it at its highest was just holding space for myself to allow the healing to happen, right? Softening enough for the healing to actually come, and realizing that it is not always activity based. It is not always, taking things or running to techniques. And I mean, I love the healing arts, and there's so many different healing modalities that, I can back up, and I love it and it works. But there's nothing that beats just sitting still and slowing down and allowing yourself to receive the healing. Another thing that you and I have spoken at length about is that self-love is deeply connected to boundaries. It's almost as if you cannot have one without the other. If you allow your time and your energy and your body to be treated carelessly, are you really loving yourself? Self-love becomes very tricky for you. And that's why you find a situation where you're always going back and forth and thinking, what's wrong with me? I love myself for a little bit of time, and then I regress to old habits. It's also asking the question around, do you have boundaries? And boundaries are different. There's those hard stop boundaries. There's ones that, okay, you can make some exceptions. There's ones that are loose. You know what I mean? Boundaries are different, and it's important to understand how yours stack up in each category. And the misconception about boundaries is that they are a wall. I want you to think of boundaries as filters. So think of yourself as a beautiful glass jug of clean water. Now imagine the world around you. People, opinions, demands, the trauma that you've experienced, the noise, the expectations from society. And imagine that as the water that's constantly, being poured towards you. If you do not have a filter, it's going to be a problem for you. If you have no filter, everything goes straight in. The dirt, the leaves, the sand, the oil, bona, right? Even if you start clean and with good intentions, you slowly get contaminated, right? And you don't notice it immediately until one day when you feel the resentfulness, or rather resentment, when you feel the exhaustion, the anxiety, not because you're broken, but because you've let everything enter your system and your energy field unchecked. So boundaries say, listen, I can love you, but I won't absorb your chaos. I can listen, but I won't abandon myself, right? I can show up, but not at the cost of my peace. And so if you don't have boundaries, you feel everything that happens around you, even things that have nothing to do with you. You carry things that aren't yours. You leak energy trying to clean water that never should have entered, your jug or your vase in the first place. And with boundaries, you stay clear, babe. You stay full. You stay in your power without even having to become hardened, right? And yes, setting boundaries can make people uncomfortable, including yourself, right? I remember when I started experimenting with the concept of boundaries, the number of U-turns that I made, immediately saying yes because I'm used to it. And then 5 minutes later, having to text and say, actually, sorry, I can't, right? So it's a skill that you learn, just like you learn tying your shoes. You go back and forth, and eventually it will come naturally. And another thing, self-love, it doesn't mean that when you have boundaries, now you're an island. No, true self-love allows support from others, right? Boundaries are not meant to keep everyone away from you. Self-love asks and it receives help. It doesn't say I can do everything on my own, but it really says I'm honoring myself enough to ask for what I need and decline what I don't. I think let's talk about some practical ways in which you can practice loving yourself beyond the aesthetics, as that is the conversation of today. The first one is slowing down your internal dialogue. Notice how you speak to yourself, especially when you're tired, especially when you're overwhelmed, right? Especially when you've made a mistake. How does that internal dialogue look like? What things are you saying to yourself? Are you speaking as if you're speaking to someone that you love? And if you aren't, that's your work. That's the real work. Are you being kind to yourself? You need to learn how to be kind to yourself inside your own mind when no one is listening. We don't know what you're thinking, right? But constantly talking yourself down is actually a bigger problem than what society is saying to you, right? So it's owning that conversation and owning that power and turning it around. And when I say turn it around, it doesn't necessarily mean that you fight the negative thoughts. No, just increase the positive ones. It is law. The negative ones will diminish. They have to. Do you understand? So you need to ask yourself, what tone am I using with myself right now? Because love isn't just what you do, right? It's also how you respond internally when things are not going according to plan. Number 2, in terms of practical ways to honor your self-love beyond aesthetics, is listening to your body's signals. Hunger, tiredness, overstimulation. A lot of us, including myself, are very overstimulated, in this era. Listen to that, honor that signal. Emotional overload is a real thing, Instead of pushing through, ask yourself, what is my body asking for right now? Is it food? Is it rest? Is it movement? Is it some quiet time? Is it connection with a friend or a loved one? Because listening is also an act of self-love. Self-love also means being honest with yourself about your capacity and your limits. Beautiful friend, let me tell you, you do not have unlimited energy. And one thing for sure, you do not need to earn rest. You do not need to prove resilience, right? Saying I don't have capacity right now is one of the most beautiful things you can do for yourself. It teaches your body to say, listen, even me, I deserve to rest. I deserve to take it slow. Give yourself permission to redefine success. If your definition of success costs you your peace, your body, and your joy, I think it needs a little bit of an update. Because self-love asks you to measure success by alignment and not by the number of applause that you get. One of the quietest but deepest acts of self-love is forgiveness, right? Forgiving yourself for things that you didn't know, for what you tolerated, for the versions of you that were doing their best to survive. Honor them. Don't chastise them. Don't talk them down. You did your best with what you knew. So I need you to stop punishing your past self. Like, it's okay. I need you to start caring for the present, right? The present you, taking care of you now. And then finally, self-love beyond aesthetics is really allowing yourself to change and evolve. You don't have to stay who you were. You don't have to stay who you were. Allow yourself to change, even when it disrupts other people's expectations of you, even when it scares you. You gotta do it, friend. It is the only way up. So I think aesthetics teach us that self-love is something to add, like add your products, add your 7 steps, add your practices, add all of these things. But real self-love, grounded self-love, often comes from what you remove. Removing the pressure, whether it's internal conflict or it's internal pressure, or whether it's pressure from the outside. Removing, comparison. Your journey is yours and yours alone. Learn to put your own KPIs. How do you measure your own success, right? Remove the sense of urgency. Not everything is urgent, chum. You are allowed to have a slow morning. Removing expectations that were never yours in the first place. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is honestly simplify your life. When it comes to the conversation of validation, I think self-love is choosing yourself even when no one is clapping for you. I had to learn to give myself the validation. I think sometimes we look to, and I mean rightfully so, one can say rightfully so, we look to our moms, we look to our father figures, or we look to our bosses and all these authorities to give us validation, to give us the applause. But self-love is choosing yourself when no one is clapping, when no one is saying, good job. You do, however, have to tell yourself, good job. You do, however, have to give yourself the validation, right? It means loving yourself in those private choices, in those quiet decisions, in those moments that only you will ever know about. And no one has to know about it. It's yours. It's your journey. It's your sacred space. And I need you to start treating it like that and honoring that. There's also a part of self-love that I think very few people want to talk about. That's the money conversation. And not necessarily how to make more of it or how to flex it, but our actual relationship with money. This relationship will reveal so much about yourself, about your relationship with yourself, than any other relationship, because money is not neutral. It exposes patterns, it exposes what we tolerate, it really shows you how you are moving through life, what you are allowing, what you are afraid of, what you believe you deserve, what you're willing to sacrifice to feel safe. And I find that we tend to confuse financial independence with, self-love. While independence matters, I'm all for that. The way you pursue money matters just as much. Have you noticed that you can be making money and still be abandoning yourself? You can be financially successful and still be living in fear. So that's the kind of depth that I'm talking about when I talk to your relationship with money. Self-love shows up in how you make money, how you keep it, and how you allow it to support your life instead of dominate your life. One of the first money patterns to gently examine is the concept you're overworking, overworking because you want to make more money. Did you know that overworking does not always come from a place of ambition? Sometimes it comes from a place of fear. You think, I'm pushing, I'm overworking, I want to secure the bag. But when you look deeper, it may just be the fact that you're scared. Either you're scared of going back to poverty, or you're scared because money means status or a certain level of reputation, and you don't know yourself beyond that, or you don't know your worth beyond your status. Fear of being behind your peers, fear of, I guess, instability, or fear of not being chosen because you want to be part of those that are chosen. So you need the money to flex it, so you belong. It could be a myriad of things. The fear of being found out. If I don't have money, perhaps people will find out that I'm actually, not that awesome. Do you understand? So I need you to work on the fact that you are awesome, and believing and knowing that you are awesome, even without the money flags. Does it make sense? So love does not require you to exhaust yourself. That's one thing I know. And for all my workaholics in the room, I want you to ask yourself, without the judgment, do I work because I feel aligned? I love my work. It's aligned to my purpose. It makes me feel fulfilled. I find joy from the work that I do. Or is it because resting makes you anxious? Do you feel like you're sleeping on yourself if you rest and you take some time out? If slowing down makes you uncomfortable, there's a pattern there worth listening to. Another common pattern is staying in misaligned work because it pays well. This one is very subtle, right? Because on the outside, it looks responsible, but on the inside, it feels heavy. You tell yourself, at least I'm grateful, at least I'm secure, at least it's not that bad, but your body keeps score. That chronic fatigue that irritability, when you show up, you're always irritated, that resentment. Self-love does not demand you to be reckless, and I'm not saying quit your job and start a business. However, it does ask for your honesty. So it's around having honest conversations and starting to peel the onion layer by layer at your own pace with no rush, and exploring that conversation to get to the root cause and stop treating the fruit of the tree. And sometimes the bravest form of self-love is admitting that, okay, this supports my bills and my lifestyle, but it does not support me. And that's okay. At least now you know. And then when you start to get into solutions mode, what you're solving for. Then when you start manifesting a different type of work for yourself, what should it have to support you, to give you the support that you're not getting in your current work. I think another money-based self-love pattern is underselling yourself. We do this quite a lot, especially women, right? This happens when you price yourself lower to avoid rejection, when you hesitate to ask for what you deserve, when you over-deliver to justify how worthy you are, not because you don't know your value, or you know your value, you've done that piece of work, but because you're afraid of being seen as too much. This pattern often, comes from conditioning, and it's not always because you don't have confidence. Perhaps, you just don't want to be rejected, and maybe that's your work. Self-love is learning to let your work and your time and your energy be respected without apology, right? You don't need to soften your value in order to be palatable, in order to be received well. So now let's talk about spending patterns. We're still keeping with the topic of your relationship with money, because as I said earlier, it really tells us a lot, or tells you a lot about your relationship with yourself. When it comes to spending, you need to ask yourself, what do I spend my money on impulsively? What do I buy when I'm overwhelmed? Is there something that you are soothing? And when you have that money, then you can buy, then you feel a little bit better, right? So sometimes overspending is not about desire. Sometimes you're using your spending patterns to regulate your emotions. Buying things to feel in control, or to feel comforted, or to feel worthy, right? And there's no shame here. We've all done it, but it's really awareness. And once you can define it and see it clearly, then you can start taking the next steps around that. When you pause and you ask, what am I actually trying to feel right now? That's a self-love practice. On the flip side, some women struggle with restricting money, right? You hoard money, you hold on to it for dear life. Not because you don't have it, but because you still have a large degree of scarcity mindset. So you under enjoy, you delay your pleasure. You tell yourself, later, I'll get it later, I'll get it later. There's something there as well worth exploring. Self-love means allowing money to support your joy as well as your survival. You don't have to pick one, Another important pattern is, how do you talk to yourself about money? Do you shame yourself for some of the past financial decisions that you've made? Do you rehearse the mistakes repeatedly in your head, right? Do you associate money errors with personal failure? And I talk a lot about, I think it's on episode 4, where we talk about no failure, just lessons. Because you spend a lot of time condemning yourself for what you see as failure. Whereas it would be a much richer experience when you take the lessons from that mistake or from that error and, keep it moving and do better next time. So self-love allows you to rewrite that narrative. You are allowed to learn, you are allowed to adjust and grow financially without punishing yourself. Money mistakes are not moral failures. It's not doom and gloom. They're merely information. Take the information, do better, and keep it moving. I think let's move into pattern and awareness more broadly, right? Broader than money. because this is where real change happens. Self-love is not just about your intentions, it's also noticing your patterns and your cycles. Where do you repeat yourself, and what dynamics feel familiar even when they're uncomfortable, but you just keep, you just keep staying there. Patterns are not, and I want to emphasize this, they're not a flaw of character. It's just unconscious strategies that you've used to keep yourself safe. But it's time, friend. Like, it's time to outgrow them. It's time to disturb those patterns, even at a neurological level, to start feeding your brain new information, start learning new patterns. The problem comes when we keep using outdated strategies in our new seasons, in our new selves or versions of ourselves that we're manifesting. We want to drag everything that we've been using for the past 10, 15 years into this elevated version of yourself. For example, overgiving to feel needed is a pattern. Settling because you fear starting over. It's okay, friend. We've all had to start over. Even when you don't want to start over, sometimes life will force you to start over. Take a beat. Self-love begins when you stop asking, why does this keep happening to me? And instead asking, what is this pattern showing me about myself, about what I tolerate, what I put up with? Pattern awareness is not about blaming and shaming yourself. It's taking responsibility and taking back that power. And let me tell you, it gives you freedom, actually. Another powerful practice worth noticing is your triggers. What makes you react quickly? What drains you emotionally? What situations cause you to abandon your needs? These are very important questions. And if you can, maybe pause, jot them down, and in your quiet time in the morning before you start your day, actually start reflecting on these questions and answering them for yourself, right? Triggers are not weaknesses. They really are the gateway to starting to understand yourself a little bit better. The more compassion you bring into these patterns that you keep observing, and the more grace you show to yourself, then the less power these patterns hold over you. One of the most mature acts of self-love is interrupting a pattern without the drama, right? Like stopping the pattern in its tracks without the theatrics and the dramatics around it. You don't need a breakdown, or what do we call it? A crash out, to break a cycle. Sometimes all it takes is, I'm not choosing this anymore. Like that one decision. Quiet change is still change. You don't need to announce your change. Also, you cannot heal patterns that you refuse to see. And it goes back to the question of spending time alone to start seeing yourself and start analyzing your patterns. But we refuse to spend time alone. Because we're so busy. I don't have 15 minutes. I don't have time. But in actual fact, I find that we are running away from having these difficult conversations with ourselves. And that's an act of self-love. It does require courage. It does require not just being kind and gentle to yourself, but actually being courageous to face your real self. It asks you to look at yourself honestly without self-hatred, without judging yourself, to say, this is something I do and I want to do it differently. It doesn't mean I'm a bad person, or I'm a terrible person, or I'm a failure. And that moment on its own is powerful. Because patterns don't dissolve when you judge them, right? They dissolve when you outgrow them. Money patterns, relationship patterns, emotional patterns, all of them shift when self-respect becomes louder than the conditioning that you've lived through historically. So yeah, self-love beyond aesthetics is this inner work, the one that we've been talking about. It's the unglamorous honesty, the everyday noticing and reflections, the quiet choices to respond differently, but more intentionally, right? And that is enough. If there's one thing I want you to take away from today, is this, self-love is not performance. Jimmy, we are not in school when we talk about self-love. We are not at work. There's no KPIs. It really is not performance-based. It's a relationship you build with yourself over time. It's through honesty, through boundaries, through rest, through trust, and forgiving yourself. So thank you very much for spending this time with me. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope you had the best time. I wish to see you on the next episode. I do hope that you are empowered and better equipped to show up as the best version of yourself. Be sure to follow me on TikTok and on Instagram at Mpomaponya Life. Join us at the Becoming Her event on the 14th of February in Hartbeespoort. We will be having a Galentine's experience focusing on self-love, soft power, healing, and doing the work that is aligned to your purpose. Registrations are open on my bio on social media, and I look forward to seeing you there. Have a good day further.